Okay, so now you're going to hear me doing something that I usually don't do, talk about gigaspaces. So this is lucky for you, it's only 5 minutes. So you're not going to get bugged about that. How many people are here developers? Quite a bit. And how many are ops? Nice. I think that in itself, you know, like 2 years ago, I would ask that question, I wouldn't get that answer. So that in itself, I think, is a big success. Having developers and ops in the same room, talking almost the same language, talking about the same tools, that's impressive. So the thing that I wanted to talk about is really the things that connects ops and developers, and that's kind of the main theme of this talk, which is an application-centric, as I would say, DevOps. It sounds kind of weird. What is application-centric DevOps? I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so this picture, I think, pretty much speaks for itself. If we look at the full cycle of an application, not just how we deploy it in production, but how do we develop it until it gets to production, there is a continuum process here. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but that continuum process includes a lot of steps. It includes obviously the development, testing, and trial. And actually, there is even prior to that, there is an evaluation step. There is a POC that we're doing to continuously evolve things until they actually get into productions. And that's kind of the big picture if we look at things. Now, the reality of things is it pretty much looks like that. If we want to build a DevOps environment, usually we have different tools for each of those stages. We have different tools for the development stages, different tools for production, different tools for the code versioning, and different tools to do the rest of the things. And we end up with that jungle of tools, as I would say. And actually, Ron had an interesting talk about that last year, the DevOps last year, where he came to, I think, a conclusion that I completely agree with, in which there is this infrastructure tools and there is application deployment tools that are not the same. Because when you think about infrastructure, you think about machines, network, storage, and so forth. When you think about application, you think about tiers, databases, and where my code is running and how the application is structured, which kind of drives a completely different way of thinking on how you lay out things. Even how you draw things in the board would look very different if you think about it from an application-centric view versus if you think about it from an infrastructure perspective. And that's kind of the main point here. So when I kind of drew, I took actually a slide from, I borrowed a lot of slides actually here, from Uri's, where he made a presentation in the last OpenStack event that we had. And I think the thing that I liked here is that he kind of broke that statement that Ron made, why infrastructure provisioning tools or infrastructure configuration management tools are different than application-centric views. And if you really look at the entire continuum here, what you really see is that this is the steps, these are the things that you need to have in order to actually build something like that. And if you look at a lot of the configuration management tools, Chef and Puppet would be a good example for that. They really tend to be overused in certain areas and very good at certain areas. So they would be very good at configuration management. They could be used for deployment of applications and orchestration of applications, but they're not very good at that. And that's something that I think most people don't realize well, and they try to take a tool and kind of overuse it across the entire continuum versus understanding that, you know, every tool has its sweet spot, and if you overuse it, it actually becomes very complex. It's like, again, you have an assembler and you're trying to write in assembler. Yeah, you could write the entire application in assembler, but why would you do that? At certain areas it would be good, it's going to give you a lot of performance or much better performance, but at certain areas it's going to be too verbose to do certain things. So it's not like those tools cannot do certain things, and it's not features that cannot be done, it's using the right tools for the right place. So again, going in that other spectrum, I talked about the infrastructure side, so the past kind of world, kind of taking the approach, the opposite approach, in which it tends to be very good at code development. And from their perspective, a lot of the past says, you know, forgot about infrastructure. There is no ops. We take care about the ops. You take care about code. The rest is trivial, and they trivialize all the rest of the configuration. But the reality is that we actually need them both. And I think all of us has that thought in mind. We kind of, when we work through that, we kind of realize that that's really the reality, that we need them both. But it was very hard to articulate that. And one of the things that I liked about Amazon is that they're kind of forward-thinking because they're running that massive marketplace that forced them to react faster than us in most of the markets. So if you really want to know what the future of DevOps looks like and what the future of IT looks like, just look at Amazon and you'll know it. That's as simple as that. And Amazon had those two angles in the spectrum. They had infrastructure, which is, which is these things. The infrastructure as a service, CloudFormation, which is a templating model, and they had PaaS. Interestingly enough, in April or March last year, they brought that new piece here, that thing. And in a nutshell, that thing is really talking about these two angles here, which is the control, the infrastructure. I want to control the network. I want to control the machines that I'm running. I want to control the infrastructure that I'm running and how it's going to be running. I want to be in control of all of those things. And this is the developers who says, I want to develop code fast. I don't want to care too much about that. So that piece is really all about bringing those two pieces together and trying to give us better trade-offs between control and conveniency. I don't have a lot of time to go into what we're doing in that space, but in a nutshell, the thing that I want you to remember is that what we're doing with Cloudify is really trying to implement the same concept that Amazon did with OpsWorks elsewhere. So if you have your own private environment or if you're running outside of Amazon and you need something like that, we do that. And that's kind of the project that were launched a couple of years ago called Cloudify. It's an open source framework. This is where I'm getting very vendor specific. And in a nutshell, it really tries to speak the language of an application and plug into the infrastructure. So it plugs into Chef, it plugs into Puppet, but the interface that you have is tiers. I have a web tier, I have an application tier, I have a load balancer, and that's how you provision things. And it plugs into the infrastructure behind the scenes. So to conclude that, we really look at the entire world as something, especially in a DevOps context, as a continuum of process in which we're developing apps. We're developing pieces of apps. We're developing tiers of apps and services on apps. And if we can interact with that and make the app interact with the infrastructure, then we get the two sides of the spectrum. Again, I have 5 minutes. I can't really get into the details of how that is being done, unfortunately. But that's kind of in a nutshell, the idea. We have the guys who actually build the blueprint, and we have guys who consume that blueprint. And that's, again, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. And the end result, the way in which we can have that smiley faces across that spectrum is by integrating those tools in the right places and having the orchestration talk to the infrastructure and not try to bypass that. So we need to kind of build the tools that actually encompass all of those things together and give us kind of a unified interface to that. And with that, I'll end.